you all wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us, and thank you all for being here with us in person. If anyone has feedback for me from yesterday's new series with Dr. Adam Stern on the medical series, he's going to be doing different topics each week. So please God, in the coming weeks, there'll be new topics. In fact, I think I have next week's topic already if you want it. Yesterday, I know you talked about blood pressure. Next week is sleep. Sleep is important. So I hope you'll all be there and enjoy it. If you have particular feedback for me, do let me know so I can give it to him as well. Now, last week or in the past sessions, we talked about the written versus the oral Torah, right? And as we said in this series, our plan is to explore, to take a journey, an overview, a bird's eye view through the various works of Jewish literature. That's our intention, that's our plan, and we have lots in store to go through. While I thought I would go a lot more in depth, I realized that's not realistic and that's not possible to go through every book of Tanakh, because then we'll be stuck here for a very long time doing that. So I thought maybe we could get back to that at another stage. Somebody turned me off of the spotlight, so I'm going to put myself back on spotlight. What we're going to do instead is to just move into some other genres, and then maybe at a later stage we could go back into the Tanakh if that's something people want to do, maybe like long after Pesach. But for now, let's rather go back into our timeline. And after the canonized written Torah, we explored and we watched a video what each book, the content of each book is, so you can really take the time to do that at your leisure. But now we want to go straight into the oral Torah, okay? So let us dive straight into one area of the oral Torah called the Medrash. The Medrash is quite a renowned teaching, right? There's a lot of the Medrash, and the Medrash gives us a lot of commentary of the 24 books of the Tanakh. And the question, of course, is, what is the Medrash? Because if you engage in any sort of Jewish learning, if you're going to shul and you hear the rabbi talk, oftentimes rabbis are quoting the Medrash. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, sorry, I meant to show you this slide earlier. This slide is this map I have here for you. I mean, I could photocopy it for anyone who wants, but I don't think it's very small. It's very small writing. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to actually print it nicely for you. But I could try, if the photocopier works, to and accept the size page. The beauty about this map, and I'm happy to, if I could, for those who have glasses, then I'm happy to print this out for you. It will have to be on the biggest page I can make. It's not as big as this. It is a A4, A3. I can print A3. Okay, I could do that. A4 times 3. So yeah, it's 2 sides. It's fine. I could copy 2 sides. I will try to do that for you, Blina, for next week, where you'll get the idea that the importance about this map is what's guiding me in this series, and I think this map should guide you as well in the series. So what we did already, as you can see here, and you can see it on the screen, is we already looked at the first part of Jewish literature, the historical Jewish literature, which is Tanakh, the 24 books of the Torah. Now we're moving into oral Torah. When it comes to oral Torah, there's a lot, and as we said, it's still developing to this day. So that, we're going to start with the first genre of that. So we concluded the written Torah, now moving into oral Torah. So you can see on the screen what area, what timeline we're holding at. Let's go into this. There's a lot of midrashic works. In fact, you'd be surprised what might be included in Medrash, which we'll get to in a moment. Yes?
What language is that in?
Some are in Hebrew, some in Aramaic. And the reason is because Some of it was written while the Jews were predominantly living in Israel, while other parts of Medrash were developed while Jews were living in Bavel, which is Iraq. And therefore, they were written in a language that was more common there, which is Aramaic. Good question. The question that we're going to address today is what exactly is the Medrash, right? Is it a particular book or is it a series of books? How are we doing, Calvin? We got sound working? Thank you so much. Perfect. We should just give you the key. Okay. Apologies to those watching us. We'll please God be live on our speaker system soon. And the reason is, we're with load shedding and all this, the sound system sometimes goes off, and the control box for our sound system, what do they call that? No, not inverter, not electrical box. No, what do we call? You just see speakers in this room, but the control system for it. I'm feeling like a adapter. No, what's the word for it? Come on. Anyways, that's in the next room, and not the router. That's for internet. I feel like not the inverter. Someone tried that one before. It is okay. Whatever. The system that controls the sound. I'm feeling like a real schmo. I better start attending Cynthia's classes because more and more I'm forgetting words. That's what I'm saying. I know, I organize it, at least I remember that. All right. What is the Medrash? And this was our question. Is it a particular book or is it a series of books, right? Is it a certain style of teaching? And what do you think it is? Which one? Very good. How do you like that? It is both. All right, just so we'll be clear about it. It is both. The Medrash describes a certain style or a methodology of learning, which is important to understanding the Torah. And it is also a general name, a title that is given to a number of works that include a variety of midrashic teachings, as we'll get to. And we'll probably spend next week as well exploring the Medrash because there's a lot to understand. But let's take it one step at a time, yeah? Otherwise, I confuse myself and confuse you. And let's begin by defining the meaning of the word Medrash. What does the word Medrash mean? Anyone want to give it a shot before I put it on the board? Story behind a story, okay. But what's the actual meaning of the word Medrash? While Raz is absolutely correct that there is a story behind the story, and that is included in the Medrash, but I'm looking for the definition, the meaning of the word Medrash. It's the Torah. To expound on, okay? And you are absolutely correct. But there's another meaning as well, as you can see on the screen. First of all, it means to expound, exposition. But it derives from the root. The etymology of the word is darash, which means to, I put it on the screen, to seek out, okay? To expound something means to decipher it, right? To expand it. How? By unpacking what is enfolded within it. And that's what the Medrash does. The Medrash is the area of Torah learning that is devoted to expounding on the texts of the written Torah. And like we said yesterday, the whole of Torah, the written and the oral, right? The whole of Jewish learning is encapsulated within what God gave us at Mount Sinai, when God gave us the Torah, right? So within the written Torah is the oral Torah. It's what did we just say yesterday? It's like that strand of DNA that just as the entire human being is encoded in that strand of DNA, right? In the same way, the written Torah, what God gave Moses at Sinai, has within it that potential for all of the Torah's teachings. So the Midrashic teachings, it's a teaching that takes a text from within the written Torah, and what does it do? It expounds it, like you said. Rashi's far later. Rashi quotes the Medrash. What Rashi tries to do is to explain. Rashi, in fact, gave a subtitle. He calls his teachings Ben Chamesh Lemikra, which means the teachings for a 5-year-old to understand the Torah. Whenever, I find this oftentimes. Last week I was in New York, I had to take care of some things. I went into the bank to just figure out some stuff. And they start talking all this jargon, financial jargon. Right? If two investment bankers are talking with each other and they could talk a little bit of jargon and they understand what I can't even repeat the terminologies that they use, right? And they go CDS. What's a CDS? Don't tell me CDS. Talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Oh, CDS stands for credit default swaps. Oh, thank you. Even that still sounds Chinese to me. Can you still please break it down? It might be English words, but I don't understand it. So what Rashi tries to do is to take teachings of Torah that maybe somebody who's been studying Torah for a long time understands, but Rashi tries to simplify it that everybody can understand. I'll give you an example. I'm now on 2 tracks of Talmud study. I'm not fully on it, so I can't pretend that I'm an expert in any of it. But I try to do the Daf Yomi. You're familiar with the Daf Yomi? Now, I've been on and off since the beginning of this series. So when we finish it in 3.5 years, I won't be able to say that I studied it all unless I start doing a double Daf now every day. I started at the beginning, then I fell off the bandwagon. COVID should have made us to be able to study better. But for me, with our seniors program falling apart at the time, and our Pesach retreat having to refund everyone, I probably grew a lot of white hairs. And then the anxiety and the stress it caused me, I didn't have the Sitzfleisch, the ability to sit down and learn properly. And so it kicked me off then. Then I tried to jump back on and different things happened. I got off, so I'm back on and off. But this track that we're studying right now, which is Nazir, I've been on it consistently since the beginning. Now, while I study Nazir, I have to say, I also do it with a program called the 20-minute Daf. It's never 20 minutes, but that's Jewish stuff. We never start on time. We never finish on time. That's just the way it goes. But the 20-minute Daf track that I learn with is meant to try to do it in 20 minutes. Usually it's an hour and 20 minutes every day. Now, I can't say that I've become an expert in studying the Talmud because I do this, but let me tell you what it does do for me. Every morning, I join with a group of guys at Torah Academy, and we study what we call Kinyan HaMasechta. Kinyan means the acquisition of the tractate. We don't do it fast speed as I do the Daf Yomi. The Daf Yomi is fast track. I do it quick, and I cannot, if you ask me afterwards what it is, I could tell you a basic idea of what I learned that day, but I cannot in any way, shape, or form claim to have acquired the knowledge well. Whereas the morning group I study with, it's for about half an hour, sometimes longer. We try to master and understand and crystallize every single line of Talmud that we study. How much Talmud do we cover a day? Not much. It goes in a half hour, 40 minutes, a few lines. And therefore, since I joined this Chabura, this group at the beginning of the Jewish calendar year, we haven't progressed too far. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's not our intention. Our intention is not to just rattle off a bunch of lines of Talmud, which is what I do with my Daf Yomi group. Here, it's about mastering. Do you understand the difference? Now, while I don't feel that I would gain too much with this because it's going at a very snail pace, very slow. But the fact that I study a page a day of Talmud at a quick pace, not mastering it, it actually gives me a tremendous advantage. What's that advantage? I have an overview, a bird's eye view. So while I cannot claim that I know all of the Talmud, but I have an understanding of a lot of ideas in the Talmud, not deep understanding of it, but a bird's eye view, a perspective, a little bit of of it all. So what I'm saying here is that while the full human being is encoded in that strand of DNA, right? You can't say that the strand of DNA is a full human being. The Midrashic teachings is a teaching that takes a text from the written Torah and it expounds it, right? It's extracting from it the laws, the principles, the lessons that it contains. It's all within there. And it's important to understand that they're both important, to have that overview and to go in depth. I think I was answering a question, something that Sephora said that I wound up telling you this. But the point I'm making is, yes, you have the entirety of the human in the strand of DNA, but that's not in one cell a full human being. So instead, here's the point. Just as the entire human being is encoded in that strand of DNA, we're saying so the Medrash expounds on the layers, the meaning encoded in all of the verses of the written Torah. And of course, if you're going to go deeper and further, there's a lot of oral Torah that expands further and further throughout the generations. Well, within the Haggadah, you will find many teachings quoted from the Medrash, from the Talmud, from many other places. Okay. I just said something that's actually inaccurate because the Mishnah and Talmud are actually part of the Medrash. Okay, let's see. Did the text get in here? It is. Pardon? Yeah. 63 volumes. Well, that's why I need to that's why today's lesson is what is the Medrash before we delve into it. Because we're only going to get into the Medrash next week, into the actual Medrash, and give you a taste of it. The week after, my plan is to give you some Talmud, although we also want to get into learning about Purim. So I'm not sure. We might have to put this whole series on hold because as we get closer to Purim and Pesach, I want to spend time on our lessons rather on Purim and Pesach. So maybe we'll just do the Medrash, and then we'll leave the Talmud and all that for after. Yes. Yeah.
So you've got a concise explanation of Purim in the Torah.
Yeah.
And then you've got a less concise explanation in the Midrash. And then you've got a very complex explanation in the Talmud. Have I got it right?
Not exactly, because a lot of the Medrash is not so clear either. A lot of the Medrash, I wouldn't say the Medrash is concise, and much of the Medrash is cryptic.
But when I say concise, I mean the number of words.
No, because the Medrash is very expansive. If the Talmud is part of the Medrash, I have a video. Today's video will do that, and that's what I want to. As soon as Tempa's here and gets the sound on, I would like to show you the video because I think the video will simplify the explanation of more of what the Medrash is. But for now, until he's able to get the sound on, let me go through some more introductory remarks about the Medrash, and then we'll do it. In fact, I have a statement here from the Talmud about it. Yeah.
The Midrash has many authors.
Yes, absolutely. Many, many authors. Absolutely. Yeah. So here, this text is from the Talmud, from Tractate Sanhedrin, Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, page 34a. Says the Gemara, quoting a verse from Jeremiah, Prophet Yirmiyahu, Uchepatish Yofet Salah. My words are like fire, says God, and like a hammer that shatters a rock. Ma patish mischalek lekamanitzos. The Gemara tells us, just as the hammer explodes many particles, well, so does a verse of scripture, any verse of Tanakh, diverge into many meanings. So what you said a moment ago, Miriam, about the concise, I would say the Torah is concise, but now the interpretations, the commentaries, the insights on it, that already is like the splinter pieces of it. And therefore, the principle behind Medrash is that every single verse in the written Torah, do you want that text back up? Sorry, I'll keep it up there for you. Just as every verse in the Torah incorporates so many deep layers of meaning. There are many, many layers of meaning within the Torah. We all know that, right? Reminds me of a rabbi who was wearing a long white beard. It was last week in Kruger Park. He saw the floods. Unfortunately, due to the floods last week, there was a lot of damage. And you could see videos of it. But what was happening at Kruger and in other areas? And what's that area near Kruger called? In no, Natal's the other way. Nelspruit, another area near Nelspruit, the B. No, Bella is also not so close to Kruger. Not warm baths, not. Okay, it skipped my head again. I had it last night. We were talking about it in Shul. Barberton, thank you, Barberton. So, I mean, you should have seen the destruction going on there. Anyways, there's one rabbi who was trying to be of help, and he's standing there with his white beard and his long black coat, and he's standing on the side of the road where all the cars are trying to go, and he's holding up a big sign, and the sign reads, has anyone seen it? He says, "The end is near." Okay? Turn around before it's too late. That's what the rabbi wrote. One of the drivers shouts out the window at the rabbi. He says, "You meshugana, I can't stand you religious fanatics. Get away with your signs." And he speeds away from the rabbi and his sign. And I'm very sad to tell you that a few minutes later, the car, you could have heard the screeching tires, followed by a big splash in the water, right? So now somebody turned to this rabbi and said, maybe you should have finished off your sign with the words that said, "The bridge is out." There's many verses in the Torah, and many of these verses have multiple meanings, right? And sometimes very cryptic. Sometimes we don't understand the meanings. And what the Medrash tries to do for us is to decipher them, to go deeper into those verses, give us the understanding of what it means, which is exactly, you were asking about Rashi. Rashi is not a Medrash. Rashi is what we would call one of the Acharonim, one of the later day commentaries. He lived about 1,000 years ago, a little more. He lived in the 900s in France. But there's different eras of commentaries, and when I will photocopy this for you next week, you'll get a chance to see Rishonim versus Acharonim, earlier day commentaries versus later day commentaries, and you'll see what I mean by that. So the point is, Rashi, I think, is an Acharon, a later day commentary, and Rashi quotes Rishonim, he quotes Amoraim, Tanaim, Midrashim, all those in order for us to understand. But it's all about deciphering, unpacking. Yeah, but that's Joshua, who continues from Moshe Rabbeinu, but Joshua is a prophet. He's from the early day prophets. Pardon? Is he? Yes, but he's a later day prophet. Okay, that's if you're following the timeline of prophets. Jeremiah was a much later prophet than Joshua. Moses was also a prophet. He's included in the prophets. The Muslims refer to him as Jebel Musa. What did they call him? Jebel Musa is the mountain of Moses. I don't know what they call him. Prophet, there's a name they have for Musa, right? Pardon? No, but they revere, they mention our prophets. The little Medrash says, yes, and there you get a taste of Medrash when you read the little Medrash says. There's also the big Medrash says. The little Medrash says is actually taking the Midrashim and making them a little bit more palpable for kids to understand them. I grew up reading it every week and getting a deeper understanding of each week's parsha. Now, the whole idea, the principle is that every verse in Torah, it has all these many layers of meaning, right? Like an onion. An onion has so many layers to it. And as you take off one layer, you get another layer and a deeper layer and a further layer. So there's many layers to understanding Torah. And the Medrash helps us unpack those layers. Okay, here's a nice one I heard the other day about this editor for the Sunday Times. Anyways, his wife left him a note on the kitchen table. You know what it said? The note said, honey, please go to the store and get a carton of milk. If they have eggs, get a dozen. And guess what happened? The guy came home with 12 cartons of milk. So his wife asked him, why did you do that? He said, because they had eggs. My friends, this is the thing. The outermost layer of meaning when you read a verse of Torah. Pshuto Shamikra, we call it. Remember, I told you previously that the Torah is like an orchard. Orchard, the Hebrew word for orchard is Pardes. Pardes is an acronym of Pshat, the simple meaning of each verse, right? The plain meaning of the text. What does the text mean? It's just a simple story. But the Pshat is only the most external, it's the outer layer of the meaning. Now we start getting into deeper layers, and that is where you go into Pshat is the first. Then is Remez, what does the verse allude to? Then is Drush. Drush is the Medrash. It's the process by which we penetrate the outermost layers and we seek out and expound the additional layers of meaning that are contained within the words or between the lines of the written Torah. And of course, we get then into Sod, which is the deep mystical elements, and that's getting far, far deeper. Let me just check where Temba is because we really need our sound here. I want to show you guys the video. I need Temba here to make sure that it's working. So I'm going to just call Temba while we're talking. Okay. Yeah. Please. Yes. What's the term for that? There's a name for it. It's simple. I call it all the time. Yeah. Yeah, Temba has it. I'm calling the wrong Temba. Yeah. Temba Sitola. I forget that we have two Tembas here. Remember I've called, it's not working. Okay. So while we wait for Temba to answer his phone, we have to understand that there are many different types of Midrashic teachings, which I said, right? And we'll start first with the two themes, the genres of Midrash, and then we'll get into unpacking it further. Who? Eov, yeah? What's the delegating? Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's two, yeah? Amplifier, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Why am I an Akachan? Why am I like a...
Thank God for Israel.
Okay, if you pay attention to the screen here, you will see, yeah, Temba has it. Is the sound back? Are you sure? Let's just test it. Hold on a second. Let's just see.
The expert says it's a wireless
Thank you. It's working. Thank you, Shkach, to you.
Power amplifier.
Yes, it's a simple word that this is, okay. If there's any doctor here who wants to diagnose me or help me out, because amplifier should have been a simplifier word that I did not struggle to know. And it's a word that I use all the time. And if simple words like that are skipping me, I'm worried. I know, but why is such a simple? Yeah, I remember that. I forgot at least, right? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, Midrashim just to start. And, okay, mute,
One that I'm with you,
yeah.
he was suspended from school.
Mhm.
And he says to me, I don't know why they kicked me out. I did nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I did nothing to be kicked out of this. Actually, I did do something. I turned off my phone's internet because I'm going to be left with no data and I get an expensive bill thanks to load shedding. So what happened was, I just realized this a few minutes ago, but I would have thought it would transition automatically. I was on my phone because when we started, just before we started the shiur, there was no Wi-Fi here. So in order for this to work, I put my phone's internet on. But I only have a limited amount of data, and now and I finished it last month, like within a few days because of load shedding. So I turned off my data a minute ago, and that will kick this off. So I actually do know why. But I would have thought that automatically the computer transitions to the Wi-Fi network, which it didn't do. It just kicked this off. And then I made sure it was connected to the Wi-Fi, and that's why we're back on. Okay, so what are the two categories of medrash? Just in case you're not sure, let us put it on the screen. The first is called halachic midrashim. What is halachic midrashim? What is halacha, ladies and gents? Law. We'll talk more about law in the coming weeks, okay? But halachic midrashim document how the laws governing the observance of the divine commandments of the mitzvahs of the Torah are derived from the words of the written Torah, okay? And we'll, please God, next week, take some examples of how this process works. And we'll study some texts that I will put on the screen, because if I photocopy them for you, I think it's going to be too much. It's just a lot of papers, but maybe a few of them I'll photocopy for you so you can have the actual copies. And what you will see is, you want copies? No, that was a different book. Okay, but I'll try to give you photocopies here of some of these midrashim, just so you have some ideas to work with. And the point is, but I'll put them on the screen anyhow. You don't have to worry, just extra paper. Letter.
If and when will the final version program be available?
Oh, I'll let you know. Okay. So we'll look at some examples of how the process works, how the medrash deduces and extrapolates and everything it does in order for us to understand how we learn halacha, how we learn the law, right? So while the purpose of halachic medrash is to demonstrate to us how the laws of the Torah and all the details in the law, right? So the Torah tells us the laws of Shabbos very concisely. It's the halachic works from the Talmud that derive from the written Torah, and all that, how we get to the final analysis of how Jewish law is developed. But the Medrash gives us a lot about that. And of course, one wonders, were the laws originally derived by the sages using the methodologies that are employed in the halachic medrash, or were the laws known by tradition already, Masara, oral law, right? And then they were just recorded in the medrash. And the reason I'm mentioning this, because if you study Rambam as an example, the Rambam seems to indicate in his introduction to the Mishnah, Rambam says that the oral Torah includes both laws that are derived from the texts, but also laws that are not derived from the text, that were actually the oral tradition that were taught by Moses at Sinai. And that you're not going to derive it from the text. According to that perspective, these are laws that were Masorah, tradition. Moses taught it to the people at Sinai, and it was never to be written down. As you remember, I'll put that text on the screen in a moment. So we'll look at some examples of that. There's another category of medrash that we're going to look at called Agada. Anyone familiar with the word Agada? Anyone know what the word Agada means? Well, it includes stories, that's true. But Agada is the general name that's given to the non-halachic teachings of the Torah. And yes, it includes stories, as Raz says, but it also includes more things. Moral, philosophical, mystical insights, teachings, ideas, parables, metaphors, narratives that we wouldn't know. So for example, a lot of the details about the life of our patriarchs and matriarchs is not written clearly in the Torah. How do we know them? From the Medrash. Okay, it's in the Medrash. And therefore, those are things that you're not going to see clearly delineated in the Torah itself. And without the Medrash filling in those details, we wouldn't know that stuff. So that's an important role the Medrash plays. Before I put the video on, I want to do one more thing. I want to put on the screen here the different types of midrashim that exist, just so you understand the kaleidoscope, the amount of midrashic genres, call it, so you have a good idea of what it is, and then we'll go into our video just to understand what it means. Okay, so let's look at the screen, and we see here 7, call it subheadings, 7 types of midrashim. The first one is legal, halachic midrashim, okay? These are midrashim that, as I explained, derive the particulars of the Torah's laws from the biblical text, and it uses the various traditions, the methods, the traditional methods of Torah exposition, which we talked about, and we will do a shiur specifically about that, the 13 methods of derivation from Torah law, okay? Now, tefillin, take tefillin as an example. What's the placement of the parchment in the tefillin? How do you, what? Okay, that's what I'm saying, so I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. The Medrash is what will give us that understanding at first, and using the association and juxtaposition, and we're going to talk more about that in a future lesson. Then we have number 2 on the list here is historical narratives. Yes? What are the historical narratives? Well, these are, like I mentioned, lots of stories of the Torah that are not specifically mentioned. Abraham and Sarah's early years. I mean, the Torah tells us Abraham and Sarah are born, and boom, fast forward, Lech Lecha, they're 75 years old. What happened in between? When did Abraham discover one God? Where did all that happen? That's in the Medrash. Then we have moral and ethical teachings in the Medrash. Okay, these are not legal teachings, not halacha, not the law, but rather this is morals, ethics, values, guidance, how we meant to behave properly as Jews, the attitudes, the etiquette that a Jew has in life. Okay, and that a lot of it is derived from the biblical text, from the narratives of the Torah, but also a lot of it is tradition. Now for this, we have a lot of texts here. I'm not doing it today. Next week, please God, we'll go through the text, an example of each of these categories, please God. Then we have philosophical and mystical midrashim. What are those? Well, the big burning questions of life, right? The secrets of creation. Again, here we have the paradox of truth and peace, and the relationship between the spiritual and the material dimensions of creation and our world. The Medrash spent a lot of time on that. And like I said, there's lots of metaphors, parables in the Medrash, and that is a good way to learn is by illustrating. And the Medrash uses a lot of hyperbole and exaggeration and all types of stories that explain and give us an understanding of the written law. But without these types of midrashic parables, we wouldn't understand it. Okay? By the way, some of these parables aren't Jewish. They're very possibly ancient stories that were, I don't know, methodologies or whatever you call them from long ago. Yeah, but many of these stories you'll find in different traditions. Chinese proverbs and stuff, you'll find them in different traditions, these stories. Okay, the boy who cried wolf or whatever, you know. Probably the most famous midrashim are the commentaries on the Torah. They explain the verses that are difficult for us to understand on our own. So Rashi, as the example you mentioned before, will quote a lot of these midrashim, and they'll explain to us a lot of verses that on our own will have difficulty understanding. And the lives of the sages are stories from the lives of the sages of not just the biblical sages. I'm talking about, say, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right? Talmudic figures who were renowned, but the Medrash fills us in on a lot of the details of their life, and that we'll get from the Medrash as well. Pardon? Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud tells us a lot about him, but guess what? The Talmud is part of the Medrash. So, the Medrash is used in two ways. On the one hand, it's the general name of all these Torah exposition. And on the other hand, it's also a very specific series of books that are expounding on the Torah, such as the Talmud. So let's watch this video. In this video, it will present in a more articulate and concise and visual way for us to understand the major midrashic works, which for us to go through, I think will take time. And instead, let the video do the job. So, ladies and gents, sit back, relax. This is a video presentation. Will take a couple of minutes. Let me just find it. And here we are. Let's get going.
Welcome to the branch of Torah study known as Midrash. Midrash comes from the Hebrew verb drush, to seek out or expound. It refers to the effort to explore, explain, and expound on the Torah. It is also the title of an entire genre of literature generated by Mishnaic and Talmudic sages, the phenomenal Jewish scholars who lived roughly between 100 and 500 CE. Midrashic literature comes in two forms. One, halachic. These works document the intricate methods used to analyze the typically terse biblical texts containing the Torah's 613 commandments. The goal of a halachic midrash is to show how the detailed laws governing the practical observance of those commandments are derived. Two, agadic. These works provide a wealth of explanation of biblical texts and narratives, parables that clarify or illustrate a point, moral and ethical teachings, philosophical insights, mystical traditions, historical narratives, and background information not explicitly recorded in the biblical text, and stories from the lives of the ancient sages. Much midrashic material was lost in the upheavals of Jewish history, but the surviving works form a library of their own. Here are the major midrashic works still in existence, including later era anthologies in chronological order. Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer explores the biblical events from the creation until the Jewish journey through the Sinai desert. It is attributed to one of the Mishnah's most prominent sages, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael preserves expositions on the book of Exodus that were taught in the academy of Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Mechilta de Rashbi offers expositions on the book of Exodus from an alternative academy, that of the much beloved Rabbi Akiva. Its recording is attributed to his disciple, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the famous author of the mystical Zohar. Seder Olam, meaning world chronology, chronicles biblical and post-biblical history from creation until the 2nd century Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans. It is attributed to Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta of Sepphoris. Sifra provides key expositions on Leviticus, which focus on Kohanim, Jewish priests who served in the temple. The work is also called Torat Kohanim, the laws of the priests. Its partner volumes on the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy are known collectively as Sifri. The insights in these volumes were taught by the school of Rabbi Yehuda, a disciple of Rabbi Akiva. Maimonides identifies the Talmudic sage Rav as the compiler of Sifra and Sifri. Midrash Rabbah is a series of 10 separate works that provide textual expositions, historical narratives, and moral teachings structured as commentaries on the 5 books of Moses and the 5 scriptural scrolls: Song of Songs, Ruth, Esther, Lamentations, and Ecclesiastes. These anthologies were compiled between the 3rd and 12th centuries and record teachings of Talmudic sages from the land of Israel from the 3rd and 4th centuries. Midrash Tanchuma is a foundational book offering expositions on the 5 books of Moses. It is named after a 4th century author heavily quoted in the work, Rabbi Tanchuma. The Talmud is not an exclusively midrashic work, but its legions of volumes include a vast treasury of halachic and agadic midrashic material. Midrash Tehillim offers commentary on the Book of Psalms. Its era of compilation is unknown, but it is cited in works as early as the 11th century. Yalkut Shmoni, a voluminous midrashic anthology covering all 24 books of Tanakh, was compiled by Rabbi Shimon Hadarshan of Frankfurt, Germany. Midrash Hagadol is an anthology attributed to Rabbi David bar Amram al-Adani of Yemen. Ein Yaakov, an extraction of the Agadic sections of the Talmud, was compiled by Rabbi Yaakov ibn Habib of Spain and Greece. The sheer number of surviving midrashic works spanning 15 centuries testifies to the Jewish scholar's remarkable commitment to identifying and expounding the wisdom and guidance contained in God's Torah.
Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, as you saw in the video, the Medrash is quite, and based on that, I would wonder why Rashi is not a Medrash. He quotes a lot of Midrash. Because if you can notice that a lot of the Midrashic commentaries are later day European scholars, and I never knew that myself. So you see, there's certainly an advantage to expanding our horizons, right? No, it came before, because Rashi was in the 10th century, and some of them were in the 13th century. Yeah. Which sec? Well, please. What did you say he was?
The one that was from Spain.
Yeah.
What year was it?
Spain, 13th century. 13th century. Yeah. So and Ein Yaakov, which is the last of the Midrashim. Now the Ein Yaakov for sure is not a Medrash itself. Ein Yaakov was compiled by Rabbi Yaakov ibn Habib. He lived in Spain and Greece, but he compiled Midrashim. I wouldn't say he's a Medrash. He's just compiling them, which is in a sense what Rashi does. Rashi gives us teachings, right? So, all right, but I think a lot of the later ones are anthologies or compilations of various Midrashim. But one of the big ones that was mentioned is the Talmud. I mean, the Talmud is tremendous, right? And the Talmud has in it teachings, that discussions over it has hundreds of scholars and sages who are quoted in the Talmud, and it spans, the Talmud is not over a small period. The Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. We'll talk more about it in a long time. But Rabbi Yehuda Anasi lived around the year 180 of the Common Era, right? So I think that's when he finished his compilation. But those teachings are from the era of the Second Temple, hundreds of years. The Talmud as well. It spans a whole period of time. And a lot of the material in the Talmud is from the Medrash as well. And it has both the halachic as well as the agadic elements of it, as the video, I think, explained better than I could. But while there's a large amount of midrashic material in the Talmud actually has a lot of other elements as well. And that's what we're going to do when we study Talmud. Please God, we'll get an idea of what it is. But please God, next week, our plan here is to delve into the Medrash, to get a taste, a sampling of what the Medrash has to say. Because aside from the Talmud, there are other works that record the Midrashic teachings, as you saw in the video, as you were asking about. And the basic idea is that the oral Torah spans the entire 3,300 years from Mount Sinai up until today. Very good. And it's a process that began obviously with Moshe Rabbeinu coming down from Mount Sinai, when he started teaching us the written Torah to our ancestors back then. But it continues to this day. As the bracha that Stephen was showing us before. No Sena Torah, that God gives us the Torah, right? Every time we engage, we toil in studying Torah, we are understanding, we are implementing, we are applying those lessons, those teachings of the Torah from back then. But that Torah, the written Torah that Moshe gave us, it included in it, it encapsulates the oral Torah as well. But of course, there are different genres of Torah, and the Medrash is just one of those genres that expound on the teachings of Torah. And you can't see very well here what it is, but the point is, maybe that's why I got to give you this copy so you could see what I'm talking about. All right, let us go into, I'm just trying to think what else I need to tell you before we conclude today so we could come next week. All right, just a few more points, a few more slides that I'll put on the screen, and we'll talk about those. The earliest midrashic works were compiled, fast forward, there we go. They were compiled in the years following the completion of the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah, like I said, was around the year 180 of the Common Era, and the early midrashim, they record the Torah's exposition, the expounding of the Torah as they were taught by the sages in the era of the temple, or just after. And the later midrashim, as the video expounded, you have scholars, sages who lived after the completion of the Talmud, right? So you have the two ends of the spectrum, and that's what the video did a good job in giving you that. Okay, but the later sages, according to tradition, did not have the same level of authority as those sages who lived prior to the, I don't know, call it the watershed moments of whatever those different timelines are that we'll get to. The Midrashim all record teachings of the Torah sages who lived and taught in the centuries from the time of the Mishnah all the way through the time of the Talmud and a little bit later. The halachic works specifically, and when we look at halacha, the legal side, those were authored by sages who lived after the closing of the Talmud, because the Talmud itself gives us much of the Jewish law and how it was developed. And so you have later midrashic works that include some laws, but we'll talk more about those next week. I just wanted to give you a brief overview today. And yeah, let's conclude here with this idea that what the Medrash includes, what it's about, and we'll start on Monday, please God, with delving into the stories of the Medrash. Oh, what I didn't do here was, okay, this is a text about why certain teachings. Remember, we were saying that certain teachings were written and certain teachings remained oral. Well, the Gemara tells us very clearly, and I put this in last week as well, that what was meant to be written, the written Torah, the 24 books, that had to be written specifically and couldn't be taught in an oral way. Whereas that which was taught orally was not allowed to be written. It was eventually written by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, but he chose to write it, which we'll talk about. It was once he realized that Jews are being dispersed and spread around the world, he worried that it will be forgotten. And that's really why he wrote it down. But we'll get to that later on. So I think to sum up what we discussed today, the Medrash is a wide range of teachings that expound the Torah, or like we said, it seeks to find the root, the source. And so we have lots of different areas of Medrash which we explored, we looked at today. And the plan next week is to start off with the stories, the parables, the secrets. We'll give you some texts that will give you examples, samples of that we'll start off with on Monday. And then the plan, hopefully, if we could cover enough of that on Monday, then maybe we'll go into methodologies of the Medrash on Tuesday, how deduction, how you deduce from the biblical text, from the Torah itself, the laws, the stories, and then if there's enough time next week, we'll continue with some textual exposition, give you some more samples of how the methodology of Medrash works. I think that will take up a few days of shiurim, and I'm looking forward to it. Yes, today it's all written down, but think about it back then. Most of it was written and without vowels, Torah 2, which means a verse can be understood in different ways. And maybe that's part of why we need the Medrash. The idea in a nutshell is if we didn't have the oral law, I could always go to my book. I could always read it. I don't need to go to a teacher. I don't need the customs and traditions of my parents. But now that it was all placed, there's the written, and you don't understand the written without the oral, you needed to go to a teacher. You needed that tradition. Well, say that again. Yeah, but a lot of it today is written in books. We have books of customs and books of traditions and books of everything. Then it was there was the Torah. If you didn't understand the Torah, you needed to attend a class. You needed a teacher, a mentor, a guide, somebody to take you through it so that you could understand it better. That's where the Midrashim all play their role. No, eventually they were written down, but back then they did. What was that?
Contradiction is that last we gave you 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so remind me. Okay. So we'll put it on record that I contradicted myself. No, so the idea was that it shouldn't be documented, that it should remain oral. Ultimately, eventually, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi realized that unless I document it, he took that risk. The Talmud says, look at these words. It's not meant to be documented. It's meant to remain oral as a teaching. But he felt that at this stage in time, it had to be documented. And if it won't be documented, it will be lost. So while it's true that it was meant to remain as an oral tradition, he changed it. Pardon? Yeah. All right, ladies and gents, we'll conclude here for today. Thank you for joining. And tomorrow morning, what's the theme? What's the topic?
Aleph Beis.
Aleph Beis. Aleph Beis Gimel. Come tomorrow. All right. See you, everyone. Thank you all for joining. There's a delicious lunch for everyone to enjoy. And please, God.